Solomon is a phenomenal activist and an old friend from the University of Maryland. So he is going to actually talk to us tonight about culturally responsive pedagogy and using hip-hop in the classroom and professional development. So I'm going to put the camera over here so you can see my fantastic group, and they will just briefly introduce themselves, and then we will turn it over to you, and then there'll be a Q&A segment. Okay, so this is my voice and literacy class at Iona College, and these are my student teachers.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dr. Bacon.
With pleasure. Can you see them okay?
Yes, I can see them.
Okay, so you guys are going to have to be loud.
Yeah.
You introduce yourself. So I don't know how this is going to have to be edited in a certain way so you can see them better. I actually should have had you guys kind of come up a little bit, but okay. Yeah. So we are going to start with...
How do you want us to introduce ourselves? Like, do we do names?
Yeah,
and like, our favorite ice creams?
Okay, so they're going to call out their name, their area of concentration. All of them are adolescent education, and they are going to just a little brief amount about you, just a little bit. Okay. So, Christopher, do you want to start, or Matt, do you want to start? You can't. Unfortunately, I can't. Let's see.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm a senior. History is my focus, and I like hats.
Terrific. Okay.
My name is John. I'm an adolescent major as well. I'm English concentration. Something about me. I'm currently student teaching at PS 83 in the Bronx, and that's a pretty rewarding experience, so that's fun.
Terrific. And John and I also did a Harlem project together working on the post-WACN evaluations with the Head Start program.
Right. That's right.
Hi, my name is Marissa. I'm also an adolescent education major, and my concentration is math.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marissa.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm also a math adolescent concentration. And play the piano.
Perfect. You know, it's so funny because I started waving, so all my students are doing the wave too. It's just instinctive. You're like, hi. Can you see us? Okay. Again, this will be edited out for YouTube because I want it to be very serious. Okay. Gina.
Hi. Oh, that was. Yeah. Hi, I'm Gina. I'm an adolescent education major, also with a concentration in math, and I recently found out I am emotionally connected to poetry.
Which is very exciting. I have to say, Gina's been writing some very powerful pieces in our class.
Hi, I'm Chris. My concentration is social studies.
Thank you, Chris. Tom? I don't know if you can see back here.
I'm history focused and Golden Beach.
Terrific. And, you know, Greg just wrote the poem about the beach, right? That was Greg who just wrote the poem about the beach, not you, Tom. Okay, thank you. Back here is Greg.
I'm Greg. I'm a mathematics concentration. Also an adolescent education major.
Say you like the beach.
And he wrote a poem about the beach. That was very strong.
I like to drive cars.
Okay.
Okay. No, that's perfect. Dana? We have Dana. I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Dana. I can't see you.
We see your hand.
Okay.
I'm
an adolescent education major, and my concentration is Italian, and I'm from London.
Fantastic. John, you're going to kind of have to... Perfect. There's Jocelyn.
I'm Jocelyn, and I'm an adolescent education major with a concentration in Spanish, and I'm Mexican.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we did a little bit with the Latin verses and stuff like that. Excellent. Beautiful. So that is our wonderful group, and this is our wonderful guest speaker.
Okay, let me know. You ready for me to start?
I sure am.
Okay, well, it's an honor. This is really a unique experience to be able to Skype into a classroom. This is kind of the first time I've done something like this, but I really appreciate Dr. Bacon, inviting me to interact with you guys and to share some ideas and actually learn from you in the process. And I want to keep this as interactive as possible, so make sure you definitely, if somebody has a question and perhaps I can't see you, because perhaps you're in the back, just, raise your hand and you could even yell something out. But I think I can see everybody. I've been a fan of hip-hop for a long time, since I was a youth. I'm originally from Trinidad. I came to the U.S. when I was about 9 or 10 years of age. Came to the U.S. and a couple of things I immediately gravitated towards because no one was playing soccer where I moved to, so I gravitated towards basketball. That became my new sport, and hip hop. You know, no one was really playing soca or reggae music, so hip hop was something that really kind of spoke to me. The artists, you know, and it's a completely different era than what we see today. Even though there are perhaps more, I would say, you know, politically conscious, you know, rappers out today than were when I was growing up, simply because, you know, rap is, you know, rap, rhythm, and poetry, which is an aspect of hip-hop culture, and we'll touch on that briefly. What exactly is hip-hop culture? But since it's grown exponentially, there are probably more socially and politically conscious, you know, rappers, you know, today than were when I was growing up. It just seems like there's so few because their messages and their images are suppressed by the corporate media, and we'll touch on that a little bit. But growing up, those artists, you know, spoke to myself and legions of other youth, mostly youth of color, but there are also youth, you know, white youth that actually hip hop, you know, really pulled them in as well, and they became artists, such as like looking at Pete Nice and MC Serch of Third Base. So it addressed things that I was thinking about in terms of what I was getting and what I wasn't getting in the classroom, and it really put in perspective a range of things educationally. And I'll play actually some of those songs so you guys can kind of get a little flavor for what myself and so many other youth ages, I would say everything from 12, 13, 14, 15, were getting at that time. You know, young men and women, mostly of color, speaking truth to so-called power, you know, talking about their classroom experiences, talking about education. One of my favorite songs was Knowledge is King by Kumo D, and I was no different than so many youth today that listen to hip-hop music, but unfortunately the messages that I got were vastly different than the vast majority of messages that youth get today, because if they're getting it from the corporate media, oftentimes it's filled with misogyny, sexism, you know, messages of senseless violence. I mean, you name it, and that is, you know, that's what the corporate media greenlights. And so oftentimes we get into this thing where we're talking about the artists, which there's responsibility, you know, on them, certainly, but oftentimes these are young men and women who were reared on that same kind of music. But who greenlights that music? Who makes that music so profitable, so popular? It's the corporate media. It's the Viacom that owns BET, MTV, VH1. It's the, you know, Hot 97s there in New York. It's you know, 93 KYOS here in DC, and 95.5 here in DC with 95.5, which is owned by Viacom. So anyways, long story short, hip-hop provided, you know, historical, you know, we have the history major right in front of us. It provided me history that I was not getting. History, you know, mostly history of people of color that unfortunately was not within the same classrooms, because I believe that, you know, youth across the board, regardless of what their skin color is, if you're really striving towards a much better society, then there shouldn't be people's history that is marginalized based on their numerical, based on the fact that they're numerical minorities within a certain country. You know, Native American history should be something that is woven throughout the fabric of America's classrooms. And that's why, unfortunately, when people get to college like Iona or University of Maryland or what have you, because they haven't been presented with these narratives, oftentimes they get there and they, you know, if they're presented with somebody else's perspective on, say, for instance, Christopher Columbus, and that person is a Wampanoag or Abenaki Native American person, and they say, I do not celebrate Columbus Day in any shape, form, or fashion. Matter of fact, you know, his history, he killed off 85% of the people in Central America, the Caribbean, South America. I see him in a completely different light. Oftentimes, because people have been socialized different, and that history has been pushed out and marginalized or just flat out suppressed, their initial instinct, unfortunately, is to become defensive, and as opposed to sitting down and having a conversation, actually learning from that person, learning about history that perhaps they did not get. And just a real quick plug, not for me, but a great book that anybody, I think, that wants to be a teacher, whether it's history or otherwise, in any school in America, I think that a book that if you haven't read thus far would be Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States of America. I think that's a wonderful text to get your hands on.
Can you see the title one more time?
People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. By Howard Zinn, Z-I-N-N. It is. He was a historian. Yeah, he passed away a couple of years ago. I had the opportunity to actually interview him on my radio show, and he's very, very, very well known. But it's U.S. history, but from the perspective of people who unfortunately their history has been marginalized or tread upon for America to be built up. So the perspective of women, the perspective of Native Americans, perspective of African Americans. It's a really, really tremendous book, and so that without further ado, that's who I am, and I want to actually throw it back to you guys really quickly, just to go around the room. Not everyone has to chime in if you don't want to, but I just want to get your honest opinion, perspective of what does hip hop mean to you? What does it mean to you? And you could just start throwing out. It could be one word response. It could be a sentence. You name it.
So anything.
Anything.
Creativity.
Bronx.
So Gina said creativity, Matt said the Bronx.
That's right. Okay. Great.
Expression.
Freedom to do something new.
Freedom to do something new.
Okay. I love all those answers. Hip hop to me, growing up was culture, it was community, it was beats, it was fellowship, it was good times, it was freedom to do something new, it was political expression, it was the Bronx. I learned about the Bronx, not being from the Bronx, and not even at that point ever had been to the Bronx, but learning about that the Bronx is the start of what we would consider hip hop today, the South Bronx. Learning about that, learning about folks like DJ Kool Herc and Africa Bambaataa and so many other folks, and especially Kool Herc, who, as we know, migrated to he and his family migrated to the Bronx from Jamaica in the mid to later part of the '60s, and he's known as the father of hip hop culture, and Africa Bambaataa is the godfather. Within the work that I do a lot of work with hip hop. I've been to places like Seattle's public schools. I've been brought out there for a week to do teacher professional development, to teach teachers how to use hip hop within the classroom, but also to teach teachers how to use their students' extracurricular interests in general in the classroom. But how do you get to know what your students' extracurricular interest is? You have to have a vested interest in getting to know your students one-on-one, as well as one-on 20 or 30. Unfortunately, as we know, there's no shortage of super large classrooms in the U.S. Where teachers and future teachers like yourself have this yeoman's job of teaching way too many students in one particular classroom. But and then also the second part of my day when I was in Seattle, having the opportunity to actually work with the students and in front of the teachers to show them exactly how I do it, to show them some of my best practices. Been to Contra Costa County, California, the Bay Area. I've been to obviously Baltimore, D.C., a range of places, using hip hop as a tool to do a myriad things, such as make learning more, or I should say, getting the students to become more enthusiastic about their academics. I don't think that you can push academics or education on anybody that doesn't have a passion for learning. So tapping into students' extracurricular interests to actually, try to ignite a passion for learning, and then it's much easier to promote academics, to promote education. Using that, teaching history, teaching diversity, and oftentimes within the constructs of I'm sure Dr. Bacon has has used this with you a lot, this phrase, culturally responsive pedagogy or pedagogical philosophies. So some of the things that I do is I believe that creating interactive and non-conventional classroom experiences, educators like yourself can significantly enhance students' overall educational experiences and their ability to learn. And the curricula that I've created and the activities that I've created are designed to harness hip-hop culture's infinite potential and to funnel it into the classroom for lifelong learning experiences within not just that classroom milieu, but also just the classroom known as the world. Hip-hop has long been a tool, a powerful tool that has been used to elevate education, elevate educational standards, goals, and in a way that's meaningful to youth. And so let's get it going. So what is hip-hop? What anybody know what hip-hop culture is? What is hip-hop? We kind of gave it away just by saying hip-hop culture. But what is hip-hop? Because you can't conceivably think of using hip-hop or country music or rock and roll or R&B or basketball as tools to call meaningful learning experiences in the classroom if you don't know anything about, or if you know very little or have kind of misunderstandings about that tool that you're trying to use in the first place. So what is hip-hop? What is hip-hop? I know what it means to you based on what you just told me, but what is hip-hop? Does anyone know what hip-hop is? Okay, well, I'll tell you, hip-hop is a culture. It's not a musical genre. It's a culture that's comprised of several different elements, and what you hear on the radio when you're listening to the radio, that is an element of hip-hop culture known as rap, rhythm and poetry. Rap is an acronym, rhythm and poetry. There's breakdancing, b-boying, b-girling. There's graffiti art, graph art, beatboxing, the ability to make sounds and beats with your mouth and your body, knowledge of self and community. Yes, that's something a la that you have probably never have heard BET or MTV, Viacom stations talking about, and that kind of should shed some light on kind of the conspiracy that goes on, because how can you profess to be a station that really cares or gives a darn about a particular music, and you don't ever mention some of these elements, that hip-hop is a culture, but knowledge of self and community is a key element of hip-hop culture. Jargon, urban entrepreneurialism, as well as urban fashion. So moving forward, how many folks have heard Dr. Bacon mention culturally responsive pedagogy or culturally responsive teaching? Anybody heard that? So
every hand has to go outside you all.
Okay, so what is that? What is that? What is that? What is culturally responsive pedagogy? Or yeah.
Are you asking what it means to us, or what it actually means?
What it actually means? What it actually means?
It means incorporating culture and your students' backgrounds into what you're teaching them, education in general, sparking an interest that relates to them on some personal level.
I love that answer. We roll with that one and go. I love that one. Yes, I couldn't have said it better myself. And so the whole someone say something?
I was just asking if they can hear okay, because it's a little garbled every once in a while, so I just want to make sure that you can fully be heard.
Okay. Yeah, if something comes out garbled on your end, in terms of coming from me, just ask me to repeat it, and I will. So I want to roll with that. I like that response. I like that definition of culturally responsive pedagogy or teaching. So moving forward to progressive. I like to combine progressive and pedagogy. And has anyone ever heard of John Dewey? John Dewey? Huh?
Yeah, they all have.
Okay, great. Big fan of Dewey's work and the Dewey-Lippmann debates and so forth. But to use a quote from John Dewey, he said, "Education is a social process. Education is growth. Education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself, and I completely, fully believe that. And that's one of the things that I embrace with the work that I do. I believe that education is life itself, and I try to be as progressive as I possibly can in the classroom, not just with my students on campus, but with all the students that I have the privilege to work with, regardless of where they are, whenever I'm brought in. And so I want to also look at, as we move forward, because I just want to decompartmentalize some definitions or theories, I guess. There was a media scholar by the name of Renee Hobbs, and you know, she looks at media representations and discusses how they play a role in people's understanding of reality. Do you guys kind of believe that media sometimes fosters an understanding, rightly or wrongly? And I would venture that oftentimes, without putting a percentage on it, it's wrongly, in terms of if people are getting their primary accounts on other people or areas or even, you know, statistics like crime or what have you from the media itself, that it may create I would say an off-kilter reality of the situation. Does anyone believe that or think that that's similar, or yes or no? Somebody had their hands up way in the back, or is that a pencil that someone's looking? Okay, that's a pencil. What do you think about that notion? What do you think about that notion?
To adolescents, right? So we look at, you know, you guys are looking at in the classroom how adolescents are targeted often by the media as well. It's a big marketing tool.
Thank you. Yes, and looking at the U.S., all right, a couple of years ago I had the opportunity to go to Norway and Denmark and do some talks over there. For instance, in Scandinavia and also much of Western Europe in general, you cannot market, as Dr. Bacon just said, you cannot market to children under the age of 16. You can't. You don't see these billboards with like Ronald McDonald, you know, telling you go to McDonald's, and I don't know, and you know, fortunately this class is not sponsored by McDonald's, so I don't mind that what I may say about McDonald's hurts their feelings, but there's a lot of, I would say, just a lot of just bad things that kind of go along with that. I don't think anyone in the classroom would be under the illusion that eating at McDonald's on a regular basis is some kind of healthy diet. You know, so you know, you can't market to children. You know, whether it's like cereals or what have you, just don't see that there. And has anyone seen the documentary? Well, it's a documentary that gets into the the whole marketing of to children, and it's a really good. And perhaps I'll send that to you, the link to you sometimes, Dr. Bacon. You can share with your class. They can watch it on their own. But you're exactly right. So, Dr. Bacon, I don't want to steal your thunder. Does anybody else have any kind of response to that? Do you believe, yes or no, that the whole marketing to children sometimes or oftentimes, or maybe a teeny bit causes their reality to be shaped in some kind of I guess imbalanced reality? Yes, no?
Yeah, everyone's nodding. Yeah.
How about an example? How about one example? Not
just children, I think adults as well. We always advertising for a wrong message. We believe in it.
Right.
I would like a weight loss pill or whatever it is, you know.
I would agree with that though, because like even if you look at like, you know, like a court system, our whole judicial system is based on eyewitness testimonies, which, as we know, is not reliable at all. But yet, you know, people believe it. And you know, when like you view something on TV, it's like, you know, here's this hair care product from Nivea or whatever it is. It'll make your hair brighter, and everyone buys it. But you know, they don't tell research. There's no data to back it up on that ad. I mean, I'm sure there is, but you know, it's not readily put out there, and yet everybody is influenced by it.
Absolutely. And Jocelyn, I saw your hand as well. Thank you, John.
I would argue that kind of
influence begins at such a young age that when we get older, that is why we become so easily influenced by everything that we see, because we're becoming programmed to listen to these advertisements from such a young age.
We're desensitized to it.
Yeah, so in the end, that is why we give in so much more in this culture to media and to everything else, because from when we're this big, we're watching, we're getting Barbies, we're getting told, like, you know, all these things, even for males, like, all these stereotypes that are being kind of pushed by media from such a young age. So, yeah, exactly.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And to provide like a little, like even like a historical context, there's a gentleman by the name of Ed Bernays. I'm sure everyone has heard of his uncle Sigmund Freud. Ed Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he's known as one of the pioneers of modern day public relations in the U.S. and not necessarily somebody I want to spend a lot of time with, but he mastered the art of manipulating the mind, and he wrote a book in 1928, or it was published in 1928, called Propaganda. And that whole thing, when you were just talking, the gentleman with the tie, you kind of alluded to that, where folks put out this this stuff, whether it's about the shampoo or this, that, and the other. This goes back to Bernays, where he's the one that created the whole. Well, for instance, women used to not. It used to be really taboo for women to smoke cigarettes in public. And so he was hired by Viceroy Cigarettes, which was a large cigarette company back then, and said, listen, we want to tap into this untapped market, women. How do we tap into this? And so what he did, there was it was a major parade in New York City, and what he did is he hired all these luxurious models to have these fur coats, and they were walking, they were walking besides the parade procession, and they were smoking cigarettes, and it worked like a charm. The whole 3-word thing, support our troops, that comes from Bernays. He was hired by the Creel Commission under Woodrow Wilson, because as we know, initially the United States did not get into that ill-fated war, World War I, and Woodrow Wilson really wanted to get the U.S. into that to that war, so he created a commission, and so they under George Creel, under his stewardship, and Bernays was brought in because of his expertise, and he created that notion, knowing that most Americans were not critical thinkers, that you can just kind of feed them stuff, all right, and if you feed it to them over and over again, they're going to think even less, and they'll start to imbibe it, and untruths all of a sudden will start to become truths and realities. And so support our troops, it was in the beginning of these movies, you would see it all the way through newspapers, and people were not even thinking that, okay, how about a good way to support the troops is to preserve their life, and not send them over to this ill-fated war. And so it works like a charm even to this day. And so he also came up with the whole thing. Doctors say, the bacon industry, matter of fact, the pork industry hired him because they wanted him to sell more, to get them to be able to sell more bacon. And so what he did is he said, okay, I'll come up with this arbitrary number. I'll get a few select doctors that agree with what we're saying. We'll pay them, and then we produce our commercials, and it will say 4 out of 5 doctors say that starting your day with a breakfast full of bacon or with 2 bacon strips is the healthy start of a day. Knowing that most people are not going to say, well, how many damn doctors did you pull? How many people did you pull? So even when you look at today, when they have these campaigns, whether it's New York City, the mayor's race in New York City, or the presidential elections, these polls work very well. And I have yet to be called, in any of these polls when they start to poll people. But people will look at these polls and say, "Oh man," and it sometimes really influences how people vote or don't vote. So you're exactly right. And the sister who identified herself as being Mexican, I really love what you said. You're exactly right. It starts at an early age, and as people get older and older, their critical thinking skills become more and more dull. They become more and more dulled out. And, you know, I see it every day. Folks my own age, older, who have a lack of critical thinking skills. And these critical thinking skills are not sharp. And it's something that can be sharpened, but it didn't just happen overnight. It happened over time. And so this is something that I think is really important. One of the best gifts that you can give children is to incorporate critical thinking in the classroom. And you can do this with hip hop. You can do this with hip hop because there's plenty of hip hop songs that expose it. So let me actually play you. I want to play you a song really quickly. How many folks have heard of KRS-One? And I'm not going to play the whole song. How many folks have heard of KRS-One? Please. Anyone heard of KRS-One? KRS-One. Anybody? Jennifer, did anyone raise their hand?
Tom knows.
Okay. All right. So I want to play a clip of this song, and this has to do with especially since a lot of you will find your ways into your way into public schools that are populated predominantly by students of color. And so this is from a song called "You Must Learn," and I hope that it doesn't come up garbled. I hope that you can hear it, and it's crystal clear. But this is KRS-One, and this is just I'm just going to play like maybe a minute of this song.
History, deal with straight up facts, no mystery. Teach the student what needs to be taught. Cause black and white kids both take shorts. When one doesn't know about the other one's culture, ignorance swoops down like a vulture. Cause you don't know that you ain't just a janitor. No one told you about Benjamin Banneker, a brilliant black man that invented the almanac. Can't you see what KRS is coming at? When Eli Whitney, Haile Selassie, Granville Woods made the walkie-talkie. Lewis Latimer, Ruth on Edison, Charles Drew did a lot for medicine. Garrett Morgan made the traffic lights. Harriet Tubman freed the slaves at night. Madam C.J. Walker made the straightening comb. But you won't know this if you weren't sharp. The point I'm getting at, it might be harsh, is we're just walking around brainwashed. See what I'm saying? It's not to diss a man. We need the 89 school system. What that kid is doing.
So that's just I just want to stop there. That's a song I heard, and I'll go ahead and date myself. I probably was about 13 years of age when I heard that song, and it rang true to me across the board. And when I heard that song, a light bulb went off in my head, and I know that it went off in many other black and brown youth heads, because I've spoken to a lot of my peers who had the same kind of it had the same kind of impact on them. But it occurred to me, I don't get any. There is no balance in the classroom. Every single person I get in the classroom doesn't look like me. Every single person is a white person. George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson. And as I named, I'm talking about folks that, and the crazy thing about it is that, even looking at George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, somebody that, and so I'm getting historical figures that if I was alive at the time they were alive, I might be working on their plantation, because George Washington owned 317 African slaves. As we know, Thomas Jefferson owned many as well, but George Washington owned 317 African slaves. Matter of fact, when he was 53 years of age, he lost his teeth, and he pulled 8 or 9 slaves of his and had a dentist extract a tooth from each one. And this is the days without Novocaine, what have you, and then place those teeth into his head. So that's even on a whole nother level. But I became disengaged with education. I love to learn. Hip hop music ignited my desire to learn, to read books, to delve into, because they didn't spell everything out to you. So they would, as you just heard, he said Benjamin Banneker. So I hear that name in the hip hop song, not getting in class. And the first thing I want to do is run home and ask my mom. First thing I want to do is go to the library and look it up. Back in the days where you go to the library and look it up in the Dewey Decimal System. That's what hip hop did. That in essence, what he's talking about, that's culture responsive pedagogy. That's bringing in Other folks is not their historical backdrops, their experiences, their out of classroom experiences, and bringing it into the classroom. And no doubt that's kind of probably why KRS-One is known as the teacher. That's his nickname, known as the teacher. Anybody want to say anything as we move on? Is that the first time anybody heard that song?
For most, yes.
For most, so that's the first time most people heard that song. Okay, have you guys heard of Gloria Ladson Billings or Lisa Del Pitt?
I did my 2 10 classes for Gloria Ladson Billings.
Okay.
Guru, president of AERA.
Wayne Guru. And Henry Guru. Yes. So this whole notion of culturally responsive pedagogy is something that folks like the people that Dr. Bacon just mentioned, that I just mentioned, have been using this, have been using that terminology and what it really means, and doing a lot of research around it for quite some time. And I would say that's why I said it's a privilege to speak before you, because right now our educational system, our public educational system, does not fully embrace culture responsive pedagogical philosophies. And quite frankly, it's something that should be embraced, not just in urban milieus or in settings that are predominantly of color, but across the board, as well as infusing within that critical thinking, media literacy. Media literacy is a very important thing, because if you don't know how to deconstruct the media, if you cannot deconstruct the media, then down the line for the rest of your life, you will continue to be a potential commodity for these large corporations, because you're not able to deconstruct what you need to buy, what you should buy, what you shouldn't buy, what you should be putting in your body, and what you shouldn't be putting in your body. So I want to fast forward to a couple things. The use of hip-hop culture within the classroom. It promotes conversations about racism, about oppression, about active citizenry, about gender issues, stereotypes, commodification, censorship. When I do it with young people, obviously I taper it down to fit the population that I use. So I for every song that I play where there might be an expletive that is used to accentuate a certain point in the song, I have the clean versions of those songs where that expletive is not even placed, is nowhere to be found. But all these things, all these things are promoted within a classroom, that when you're using hip hop responsibly. I was talking to Dr. Bacon earlier with young people I've worked with in Baltimore. When you're looking at digital literacies, using podcasts, has anyone ever thought of or heard of the notion of using podcasts with your students? Anybody? Hands? Yes? No? Podcasts? Podcast. Okay, I see the hand. Blogs and those type of things.
Tom was saying that he took a summer class, which included
history. Yeah, that's stemmed deeply into podcasts.
Okay.
It's very American 70s, 80s.
How did it work? Was it effective?
Yeah, it was effective. I mean, because it covered 70s, 80s, 90s. It was a later U.S. history course. So we would be 1 week in the steel mines with women being discriminated. Then a few weeks down the road, we'd be listening to a podcast about NWA and all those political platforms that came through hip hop during those late years. So it was definitely beneficial.
Right. I did it with a group of students from Baltimore City, and the amazing thing, and I was telling Dr. Bacon this earlier, is that a lot of these young people, and I'm going to give you an example of a song that kind of accentuates this, but a lot of young people feel that there's no democracy in the classroom. And they may not say it the same way I do, but when they articulate themselves, they're saying, I feel that there's no democracy in the classroom. I don't feel that my perspectives are welcomed. My experiences out of class are welcomed in the classroom. And so I have a podcast myself. And so what I did is I set up a show for these young people to actually come on my show and actually talk about education, talk about their education, what they thought about education. And at the time, the city of Baltimore had just cut education by, it was something like $15 to $17 million. And I had this young man come on, he was a junior, and he came on and he said, what's funny, this is his words, not mine, and he's able to articulate things that a lot of folks my own age are not articulating. And he's like, you know, it's interesting that no one ever asks us these questions. No one ever asks us these questions. So yeah, I got a lot to say about education. We you know, our government, there's no shortage of opportunities for them to find, you know, to bomb other countries, or to get into wars, and to spend $1 million on a missile, this, that, and the other. But yet at the same time, my school system, and I was trust me, and I was in his school. These young people were in a school where the paint was falling off. The cafeteria was a converted classroom. The kids were being taught history on computers, and there was one proctor in the classroom, and they were being taught history. Imagine that, something as interactive as history being taught on a computer. And so he was talking about the money is there. I know the money's there. I know the money's there. And so it was just a great opportunity for them to politically express themselves. And then we talked about hip hop. And these young people, it was amazing. These young people, and it was almost like people probably thought I handpicked them and said, "Oh yeah, okay, you definitely." But I actually didn't. It was random. But they said, "No, I think a lot of the hip hop is offensive. I think a lot of it is offensive. But that's what they want. That's what they want us to act like." And he said, "That's what they want us to act like." So they show us images of rappers who look just like us, who are talking about foolishness and talking about sexist things towards women and violence. He said that's what they want us to act like. And so the podcast was I think I got more out of it than they did, quite frankly, because I learned a lot. But that's one of the things that you can do with digital and you know, with the whole concept of digital literacies. And combining that with culturally responsive pedagogy. Something I do also is what I called mindset transference. I know it sounds, you know, something out of the Twilight Zone, mindset transference, but what it is basically is I tap into the students' extracurricular interests, find out what that is. So in this case, say it is hip hop, and say they also have an interest in athletics. Say you have a young man who plays, he's a sophomore and he's a star on the football team at the high school that you're teaching at, but for some reason it doesn't click with social studies or history, or say even English literature. You have a conversation with that young man and you talk to him. If you really engage yourself with his life and you talk to him about, really sit down and talk to him about his love for football, and then you start to talk about, well, what do you do in practice? How did you get so good at football? How did you get so good at football or basketball, whatever it is? And then you talk, well, in practice, when you prepare for the games, do you just go out there and run around? No, we have a playbook, we have plays. Oh wow, you have plays. So how big is the playbook? And then you start to have a conversation with them. Well, do you know that it takes a lot of mental prowess? And I don't like dumbing things down for them. So I'll say mental prowess. And you know, oftentimes the student will ask, and if they don't ask, I'll say, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say prowess. And they'll either answer the yes or no, and I'll tell them what prowess means. I don't believe in dumbing things down to kids, all right? Because then you just play into the system that has really, I would say, done them a disservice for much of their life. And then you explain to them, like, you can't be a dummy. That the whole notion of a dumb jock is something that you buy into, but you can't be a dummy and memorize these plays and to go to the line and to process information, look at the defense, look what the defense has given you, and process information that, okay, I'm going to change things up a little bit. I'm going to throw it to my receiver on the right slot. And even with basketball, you say, how did you get so good at basketball? Well, I went out, I shot 200 jump shots a day. Well, that's discipline. Johnny, you have to take that same discipline into the classroom. And if you don't get English lit, if you don't get history, if you don't get social science, if you don't even get math or sciences, what you have to do is you have to repeat it over and over again until it becomes second nature, until you get better at it. That's how you got better at basketball. That's how you get better at anything. And I'm not a big proponent about students playing video games over and over again, but you can even tap into their interest in playing video games. How did you get so good at this video game? You played it over and over again, and you talk about the whole notion of balance, balance, balance. Does it make sense? Yes or no?
Oh yeah.
Yes. Oh, okay. And so you have to be actively engaged in their lives. I believe that you have to help these young people visualize attainable goals, and the goals are something that you set out with them, short-term and long-term goals, and don't try not to set a cap for them. Establish that trust. If there's no trust, if there's no, and kids are very, very smart. If they feel that you don't trust them, or there's an aspect of trust that's missing, it can totally throw off the entire relationship. So you really have to be honest with them and be yourself. Be yourself. If yourself is cool dude, or you're a cornball, or you're goofy, be yourself. They will appreciate that. Visualize reasoning. You have to create a correlation between those extracurricular interests and the classroom performance, which I was just talking about. And so going forward, I want to slow down because I'm almost at the end, and I want to really open it up for questions. And I just want to let you know, like, what I'm doing here is I'm condensing what usually is a 90-minute workshop into I don't know how many minutes. So I'm condensing it. I'm skipping over a lot of things, but I want you guys to kind of get the general idea of what I'm doing, or what I should say what I do when I facilitate these workshops with you. There's a couple of activities I want to mention. All right. Before I mention those activities, well, I'll give you an example. So there's an activity I have that's called Wordsworth. All right. And what I do is I go to the young people, and whether they're middle school or high school or have you, and I present them with sometimes an arbitrary number of words. And if I'm going to be working with them for an entire week, I'll say, okay, these 15 words I want you to know by the end of the week. We're going to be doing something that's going to be hip hop related, and if you don't understand these words, then you can't participate. And so that usually, is an extra boost. And sometimes I'll let the cat out of the bag. Well, we're going to be using these words. We're going to be using these words in a rap. And rap is poetry. And so at the end of the week, basically what the students are supposed to do is I have them put the words together and create their own poem or their own rap, which they will perform in the classroom. Residual effect from this activity is that when they're performing in front of the class, they are learning how to express themselves in front of others. So their confidence level is becoming ameliorated. Their speaking skills, their public speaking skills are becoming ameliorated. And but what they're doing is when they put it together. So, for instance, I had a young man. I'm not making this up. He said, "My name is so and so." I'm not going to say his name. My name is so. Well, let's just say in this case, his name is Billy. My name is Billy. My rap style is here. It's there. It's everything. It's everywhere. You could say it's ubiquitous. So one of the words was ubiquitous. So when he used it in that context, I knew he understood it. So I didn't want them to memorize it. I didn't want them to simply memorize the words and then forget them down the line. I wanted to see that they actually comprehended the words that were assigned to them. So when they're tasked with this assignment, they have to structure a poem using these words, and when they do that, you can automatically be able to tell whether they understand the word and they comprehensively understand the word in the context that it should or should not be used in the first place when they get in front of the class, and it works like a charm. So that's just one example. Another example is using hip hop. I have one called Rap Through History, where I give students pre-selected songs such as like The Message. Message came out. Anyone heard the song The Message? Broken glass everywhere. People pissing on them. Yeah, they just don't care. Anyone ever heard that song? Message. The Message. It's a hip hop classic, folks. This is hip hop. So The Message it came out in 1982. So I use that song. And so what we do is I say, I want you to, and I'll play the song, and I have the clean version of that song as well. I want you to research the circa date that song was released, 1982. What was going on? And so then I asked the students, because Duke Booty and Melly Mel, the two rappers on that, the two MCs on that song, they're painting a very vivid song. As a matter of fact, Little Hip Hop History, that's the first so-called conscious, politically conscious or socially conscious rap song that was released to the mainstream. And so they were painting a very, as you know, in the early 80s, New York City was, was almost on the verge of bankruptcy. It was like mass poverty. And so they're painting a very vivid picture of inner city life in New York City, the poverty, being forced into this, and all these different things that come along with poverty, drug sales and so forth. And so and how this young man was forced into drug dealing and how the ramifications led to his death because he was forced into it. So it's not one of these songs that glorifies drug dealing in any shape, form, or fashion. And so he's, as they're talking about how decrepit the environment is, and the apartment complex that they live in, or the projects they live in. So I said, well, research that. So the students come back, they research. Well, Indiana won the NCAA championship in 1982. Isaiah Thomas and such was the president. And I said, the president. And then I have students. I'm trying to tell you, I have 9th graders coming back with terminology like Reaganomics and talking about the haves and have-nots, and how many people within urban settings were left out. And so that's a beautiful exercise. The other one is just really quickly, I give them historical figures and I ask them to place those historical figures into raps, and we have a conversation about those historical figures. Who is W.E.B. Du Bois? Who is William Lloyd Garrison? Who is Helen Keller? Who is Fannie Lou Hamer? And so this is an actual, I'm going to read one that was written by this young lady. Her name in this case will be Missy, but she gave this. She was given this assignment, and this is what she turned in. And I said, can I use this in the future? Yes, you definitely can. She said, my name is Missy. I'm going to take you on a journey through history. 1, 2, 3, here we go. Please, everyone, listen to my flow as I take you through my educational show, teaching you things you need to know. Because it don't matter if you're a girl or a boy, I'm sure my rap you will enjoy. Let me tell you about this cat named W.E.B. Du Bois. When it came to education, he sure brought the noise. Whether you're young or old, you can learn and teach. And like Frederick Douglass, you can write a superfly speech. That is culture responsive pedagogy. That is history. They are learning things that, quite frankly, a lot of my students that I teach in college did not know. Du Bois, who? Frederick Douglass, I vaguely have heard that name. So these are examples, and I'm going to end on this. I want to play this song by the Jungle Brothers, who are part of the Native Tongues, and this song was released in 1989. And I want you to listen closely to what they say. I want you to listen very, very closely to what they say, because a lot of what Lisa Del Pitt and Gloria Ladson-Billings and Wayne Au have said for a long time is wrapped up in this little verse in this song. What's up, kid? You want fat? Go change the fat. Will be raised. Nobody believes this to be true. Maybe it's because my eyes ain't blue. You ain't gonna find it in the history book. Come here, young blood, and take a look. You dig down deep inside this hardcover. Don't you know that you was born, brother? When you read about this slavery, never about the black man's bravery. You look at the pictures and all they show is African people with bones in their noses. That ain't true. That's a lie. You didn't get that from our lemon pie. Yeah, I got class. I got a deep, cause history meant nothing to me except the definite nap. That's why I always sat in the back. I talked to girls and write around, cause I didn't know all times of black man's time. When I was young, my mama told me stories of black people's fight to bring us glory. I used to think these were stories to put me to sleep, but now I know mama's talk wasn't cheap. I know Africa's for Africans, and history's the blood of every woman and man. Now I'm here. So what they're doing is they're speaking to the needs and concerns of a range of students who have historically been marginalized. He speaks and says, if in terms of our history, unless it has to do with some crime or criminal nature, it's not going to be. I'm not going to hear about it. And so. He says, Mike G says, history meant nothing to me. And why would it? If we have a room full of men, I mean, if we have a room full of men, and then we have 4 women in the room, and the only history that they're getting is history about men, why would they care about history? Why would they care about history? They wouldn't. So I tell you this, if you are not from these communities, try your very best to put your feet in their shoes. What would it be like if you did not get any history about your cultural background, about your gender? What would it like? What would it be like? How would it inspire you if you were a young kid, say age 12, 13, even younger, 9, 10? What kind of impact would that have on you going down the rest of your life? And I'll end on this quote by Gloria Billings, because we just listened to the Jungle Brothers. And so she says, the lyrics of the Jungle Brothers, we just listened to them, as well as many others, demonstrate that even if African American students are essentially being kept out of educational discourse and suffering academic failure as a result, it does not mean that they are not actively cognizant of the need for culturally relevant pedagogy in their classrooms. They know it, even if we don't know it. They know it. They know what they need. They know what they want. And so I would say this, and I don't think it's anyone in this classroom right there in Dr. Bacon's, but if you have any notion of not embracing some of these concepts, not necessarily my concepts, my practices, but the whole concept of culturally responsive pedagogy, if you're working with young people, especially coming from disadvantaged communities, or what I prefer to say, governmentally neglected communities, perhaps your time is best spent on teaching in a more opulent community, because you will be doing those children a disservice. Your job is to come in there and to provide them with a ray of hope and opportunity that education can bring, that spark can bring through you introducing them and exposing them to something and connecting, whether it's science or mathematics, by way of something. So I will end on that note. It has been an honor, and I wanted to know if anyone has any questions in any shape, form, or fashion. Now would be the time. But like I said, it's an honor, and I give all the credit to Dr. Bacon. I knew Dr. Bacon when she was just Jennifer Bacon. Now she's Dr. Jennifer Bacon, PhD, but she has always been avant-garde. Like when she was a PhD student at University of Maryland, she's always been ahead of the curve and has been, tinkering these things, and it's always been, I would say, and I'm not just saying this to kind of like tickle her ego, I'm just saying this, that to me, she represents what we need more of in terms of education in this society. So she may not be a teacher in a classroom, but she's training future teachers. So we need even those folks that are training future teachers to embrace a lot of the educational philosophies that Jennifer Bacon brings into her classrooms, and she's been doing it for quite some time, and it's not a surprise to me that she's doing it there at Iona College. And so ask away if you have any questions or comments, and my email is, she can give you my email. Anytime you want to email me, I can give you a list. I have a packet. I can actually email you an educational resource packet that you can bring into the classroom with you. I'll email it to you for free of charge. It's it's about 20 pages, and it's filled with activities. And if you don't want to use hip hop, if you find out that your students are into classical music or R&B or what have you, or athletics, you can just substitute the hip hop for something else. So ask away.
Any last questions? You are brilliant. I so appreciate you doing this. It's such an honor always to work with you. So thank you, sir, for all of your hard work and for Skyping in with us tonight from Maryland.
Not a problem. And I totally mean that. Just like I said, email me. Jennifer will tell you, Dr. Bacon will tell you, I will email you back. And Dr. Bacon, please, feel free to give them my websites. It has a ton of resources there, and you can also, if you email me, I can actually send you the link to that interview I did with the Baltimore City students, and you can listen to that yourself. It's very inspiring, empowering, and so I hope that this is not it, the last time that we correspond. But if it is, best of luck to you in your future endeavors. And but if it isn't, I look forward to building with you in the future, because that's the only way we're going to really improve and strengthen the public school systems, within the U.S. And my hats go out to the public school teachers who public education has been under attack left and right, and my hats go off to all those public school teachers that are out there right now and there are going to be out there in the field, because we're seeing unprecedented attacks on the institution of public education in America. That it's really unprecedented. It's really unprecedented, and so the teachers need to be supported. They really do. There's some really great teachers out there. So thank you. Okay. Peace.